Welcome to the Children in Scotland podcast. In this episode, Elaine from Children in Scotland, Sharon from the General Teaching Council for Scotland, and Titi from Intercultural Youth Scotland discuss their partnership work on the Diversity in Scottish Education project, exploring the learning so far, challenges, and what comes next. Welcome to the Children in Scotland podcast. My name is Lynn Gilmour, and I'm here today with Elaine from Children in Scotland, and Sharon from GTCS, and Titi from Intercultural Youth Scotland. And we're going to be talking today about the project that we've all worked on, which is Diversity in Scottish Education. If I can start with you, Elaine, can you discuss a little bit about the inception of the project, its background and its broad aims?
Yes, so Children in Scotland has been working with General Teaching Council of Scotland for a few years now. We did work, some consultation, participation work with children and young people around the professional standards. And through that relationship with GTCS, we knew that they were focusing on diversity in Scottish education. We knew that they'd been looking at that from an LGBT point of view. And we felt that we could support that work and approach them to do some work with children and young people. But GTCS then said, well, actually, we're focusing on diversity from a race point of view. And maybe this piece of work should focus on that. So we put a proposal in last summer, 2020, and we took that work forward from August, September 2020, continuing now.
And Sharon, can you describe a little bit about the background or the reason for doing this project from the perspective of GTCS?
Of course, so we took part in Professor Rowena Ashard's Teaching in a Diverse Scotland working group, which was looking at the diversity of the teaching workforce. And we had a number of recommendations that we had to work towards as part of the outcomes from that report. And actually, this was just a great opportunity for us to be able to use the voices of children in our Scottish schools and tell us what their thinking was and actually what they needed as a means of us supporting the outcomes of Rowena's report. It's been great partnership. Children in Scotland clearly know how we work in General Teaching Council with the previous wonderful work that they did on professional standards for us. So actually this has been it was an ideal opportunity to use the same connections going forward for this project.
And Titi, can you describe a little bit about Intercultural Youth Scotland's involvement in the project, thinking about the work that you've done so far?
Yes, thanks so much. And just generally, I'm really pleased to be here and that we kind of get to share this conversation outward. Intercultural Youth Scotland is an organisation that works with young people of colour and Black young people. And we really needed to bring that focus to the consultation because a lot of the work that is done around race and racism and cultural diversity is currently still led by white organisations. And there is this big discrepancy between lived experience and anti-racist expertise, which we bring as an organisation. And I guess the people who are in charge of the organizations that actually currently lead the work around young people and children. And it's been really great to connect with GTCS and Children in Scotland because they've been so willing to take our ideas on board and to actually support us as a young organization to bring these ideas forward and to, bring these structures and these ideas and the lived experience into the room and acknowledge it and work with it instead of saying, oh, but we want to be the ones leading on this, or but we've secured funding for this opportunity. But instead they just really took on and said, oh yeah, and we recognize there has been some mistakes and actually we want to hear from you and how to engage this better. So it's been a really good collaborative work.
Sharon, you were going to touch on something that Titi had said, and I wonder if it relates to what Titi had raised about perhaps learning that needed to be done or looking at the project from a white standpoint. Is that something that you'd like to talk about in terms of how the project was structured or even the title of the project?
Certainly from a structure point of view, and Titi's absolutely correct in what she was saying. So our intentions were well intended when we worked on the proposal together with Children in Scotland. And it wasn't until both Elaine and I at different times participated in the Race Equality in Education meeting that we heard from one of Titi's colleagues in Intercultural Youth Scotland who was presenting there. And it really hit home to me how, although our project had great intentions, we actually were not going to be credible And we were also potentially running the risk of harming children who we were engaging with, because my organisation is very white-led, and Children in Scotland do not have any Black people or people of colour as part of your organisation. So therefore, we were not able to represent and talk with, from a lived experience point of view, with the people with whom we were wanting to engage with. So it really wasn't going to have any credibility. So that was at that point then, Elaine and I spoke about this, and we got in touch with Intercultural Youth Scotland and asked their advice of how we could move this project forward. And I've got to say that it's been wonderful. It's been such a wonderful experience to work collectively as the three groups, because I think we've all learned from each other in this process. And I think that's what has been so meaningful about it for me, that my own learning has increased tenfold by going through this process. And actually now I know that the work and the findings will be far more credible and will be far more impactful, because we've had the right people having the right conversations and ensuring that we safeguarded our children in the process.
Elaine, did you want to touch on the use of the word diversity in the project? I know there's been conversations around that.
Yeah, so as Sharon had mentioned, I suppose the initial thinking for this project was around Dr. Rubina Arshad's 2018 report, which talks about teaching in diverse Scotland. And so we were using that language around diversity. But reflecting on that, looking back on that, I think we learned fairly quickly that was too general, that we weren't actually being honest about what this project was about, that we weren't being specific enough about what we meant about diversity in this project, and that really we should have said that this is about race. And Dr. Rubina Arshad's report is very clearly about that. And our aims and objectives and learning from this project to influence and support teachers and improve Scottish education for everybody, pupils and staff, etc. That had to, it was based on that report, but actually for us to move it forward, I guess we should have been a bit more open and honest about that. We did, this has been in different phases, and phase one was doing a literature review around race and diversity in education. And from that, we learned what young people had shared, and we were then able to build on that, working with a small sort of co-design group just at the end of 2020. But looking back, even sort of getting those young people to work with us, we were very lucky that we got children and people from across Scotland with a range of lived experience. And by that point, luckily, we were working with Titi and colleagues at Intercultural Youth, so we were able to support them. But even just going back those steps to writing the proposal, to the language of the name of this project, we've learned a lot about what should have been better, and we wouldn't do that again. And just this concept of what diversity means from a race point of view even that alone has been a lot to learn through this project.
Yeah, I just would like to come in and to kind of explain a little bit further, because I guess there's no one here to saying, oh, the word diversity, discredit, we don't want it. But it's more to just clarify what we mean when we say, actually, we need more clear language around that, because when we are talking about anti-racism and implementing structures and rethinking kind of the system and how Black and POC young people are marginalized in the current structures that we see, we kind of need to talk a bit more about those structures instead of diversity, and actually think, what are the power structures that are in place that keep the experiences, or that ensure that young people experience racism? And that's maybe a bit like an out there way of phrasing it, but by just diversifying a curriculum or just bringing more different perspectives on board, we don't actually challenge the structures that are in place. And we need to do that in order to overcome barriers and in order to overcome structural oppression, of which racism is one specific kind. And by just calling it diversity and just calling for diversifying efforts, we won't actually be able to meet these anti-racist goals of overhauling a system and trying to actually bring long-term change, if that makes sense.
So it sounds like the project, and we'll touch on some of the project work and findings in a moment, but is it fair to say that the project has been interesting and positive, but has also maybe raised as many questions as it's answered, and perhaps become broader than anyone ever anticipated? I
would certainly say that from Children in Scotland's learning. And yeah, I'll sort of reflect on what Sharon has said, that we are very grateful to Intercultural Youth Scotland for working with us, because, people are under a lot of pressure, and, whose responsibility is it for me to learn? It's my responsibility, and it's Children's Scotland's own responsibility, but we have learned so much from this partnership. There's for sure more work to be done with partnerships that we formed here, and Children's Scotland, we've learned so much about our own practices and our role within that white privilege system, and the fact that we have the microphone and we have a seat at the table, and we're part of that whole system, and so therefore have a role, a really important role to change our own practices and understanding, and to share that as well. So that, of course, will impact on how we move forward and do projects. And so we want to do this area of work. We know that young people and children really care about this theme. Are we best placed to do that? Who should we be working with? Should it even be us doing that work? Those kind of questions from the very beginning, let alone how we will deliver the project, because even the delivery, we've learned a lot about the delivery, about the language we use, the activities we use, the staff we use, and how we do that. So for sure, the learning in the first 6 months of this project will have an impact on Children's Scotland's practices and our projects going forward.
Sharon, did you want to add on to what Elaine has just said?
The project in my head, and actually in reality, has grown arms and legs. And I think the challenge for us will be to keep it narrow in our report and our findings. Taking part in, so I gatecrashed, if you like, the work that Titi and Elaine were doing with the class teachers who were leading, because I was keen to learn and undertake the anti-racist training. And actually, that for me in itself is just something that needs to be done nationally. There needs to be a real national strategic approach to what we're doing here. But the one great thing that we're doing is we're listening to our children, and our children are the adults of tomorrow. And one of the sort of couple of statements from the first report were saying racism can start at an early age, so young people need to understand it. The next generation can make a change and stop racism. That's powerful. And that's come from a young person. They're saying that if you're told from a really young age, it's going to stick with you. So actually, how can we nurture our young people, and what can we do? And our teachers in schools have such a strong voice in that. Rowena, in one of her, in our summary report of the teaching in a diverse Scotland, said, we need to go deeper in education beyond celebration, to have teachers and lecturers who are much more critical thinkers in the areas of equality and discrimination. And actually, all of that is so important. To support our young people, we have to have the teachers that are skilled and have the knowledge. And if they've not got the lived experiences, they need to learn what they have to do in order to be able to make sure that we deal with systemic racism. And I think this project is a starting point of that process. We'll be able to use the beliefs and understandings of our young people who've got such powerful insight that we don't have as adults, and use that and capitalise on that going forward.
I think just to sort of close this part of the discussion, I think that it feels like it's very important to have these conversations, and we've made a start on those. And it feels like Scotland is in quite a fortunate position to have a teaching council which has oversight of all those things. We look at what happens in other countries, for example, America at the moment, with bans on discussions of critical race theory and young people having information withheld. And so it feels like the conversations even starting here, and the GTCS and government, or whatever the new SQA may look like, being in a position to actually listen and make change. It might be small steps now, but it feels like change is possible rather than discussions about change. It feels like we're quite fortunate that the mechanisms are in place in Scotland to carry that forward. But I don't know if others agree.
I think we're very fortunate to have a place at the table. And we're one organisation amongst a lot of national organisations, but it's actually having a place at the table, as Elaine said before, but having the voices of organisations like Intercultural Youth Scotland who will keep the momentum and keep the conversation on the agenda is really important. And I think this report will certainly be shared in these strategic forums across Scotland, and will certainly inform the next steps that take place. So it's keeping the focus, keeping it tight, keeping time scales tight going forward to really have that impact. And I don't think by any means it will happen overnight, but actually having the conversations is a really good starting point.
I just would like to add that we must make change, because I think it's our duty of care to the young people and the children. And it's a structural issue that we're tackling and facing, and it's a long story. But we need to carry on and we need to continue to push it, because otherwise we won't see the change that we need to see and that the young people deserve to see. So I really want to encourage that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Titi. What I've learned from working on this project is young people's experiences. And, you know, when the ambassadors from Intercultural Youth Scotland talk about their experiences, it is so powerful that there's no way we cannot make those changes. And this project, you know, all these different phases in this project have done only backed up that experience, that, for want of a better word, evidence, as if we needed any more. But, you know, we've got all these voices, children's voices, telling us about their experiences within school. You know, the positive ones as well as the very challenging, traumatic ones, and also making suggestions for change that are completely doable. And if we have organisations such as GTCS on board, then those changes will take place. You know, that the change will take place in Scottish education over the coming years, and it'll be based on young people's lived experience and making, you know, that's a strong, powerful start to work on.
Elaine, while you're talking around the project, you know, itself, we've alluded to what the project's done, and we've talked a lot about its aims and how it maybe could have started from a different perspective. Do you want to talk a little bit now about some of the work you've done so far and kind of shed light on how the project has looked and what it's done?
Yeah, there have been 3 phases in this project. We started off looking at the literature that's out there of what children and young people have said already around their experiences of diversity within education, specifically from a race point of view. And what we found was that young people have shared their experience, their ideas of equality and diversity, but it was really, from a race point of view, it was from their experience of racism. And we knew from that literature review that had to be the place that we started. Like, that was young people's experiences, and that's where we had to make a change and start from that. But that's when we realised that as white organisations, we could not do that safely, and that we had to work in partnership with people, with Titi and colleagues at Intercultural Youth. And from there, we took that learning, and we had a national co-design group, a steering group of young people from across Scotland. And we sort of dug deeper into the issues that we'd seen in Dr. Rowena Arshad's report, but also in that literature review. And we focused on education, we focused on what culture looks like and feels like within education. And we used the word culture specifically as a sort of safe way into that conversation, and unpacking what culture means and what we experience in our own lives, but specifically within school or educational settings. We looked at the role of staff within people's experience of school and representation or lack of, and the impact of that on children and young people. We also looked at curriculum, and again, the diversity within that or lack of, and how that might impact on children and people, especially Black young people and young people of colour. And then a little bit around positive experiences and also safely experiences of racism. And that was phase 1. And we got so much learning from that first phase, just from that literature review and that small group of young people from across Scotland who shared their lived experience and shared their suggestions. That then informed phase 2. So we developed a resource based on that, sent that out to 3 different schools with a range of backgrounds, so 3 very different schools, and they're working on that with some more young people. And Titi is working with some older young people on the same type of areas, and we're due to get that information back and write a deeper report for GTCS this summer. We then hope we can take that learning and build it even further with more schools involved in the next academic year, but that's still to be confirmed. But we have, even as I say, phase 1 taught us so much, gave us such rich information about young people's experiences and opinions and suggestions for change. And we believe phase 2 with the schools will give us even more feedback. You know, initial feedback from teacher, there's been so much learning there already.
Titi, can you then, Elaine has touched upon the work that you've been doing specifically. Can you give us an overview of that work and what it's involved and challenges, positives, any initial findings that you have, if it's not too early for those?
Yeah, I would like to come in for kind of to comment on some of the things that Elaine has said as well, just before going into what the youth group specifically has done. But I think it's really important to kind of, as a sector or as society, I don't know, we are in that loop of evidencing that racism is happening to young people or to people of color in general. And we need to move away from that. We know that racism happens, and we know that if you are a person who is racialized as Black or person of color, that is an everyday issue. And so already moving away from that conversation of, oh, can you tick the box and actually tell us about the experience of racism, or what does it actually feel like? If we move away from that and say, we acknowledge that you experience it, where do you experience it? In what ways do you experience it? If we move away from that and actually talk about how to tackle it, who are the bodies that are keeping that racism in place or enabling that racism, or which would be safe ways of challenging that or safe ways of addressing it? And I think that is one of the next steps. And that is also something that we've tried to pick up in our work, because it's very much about, where do you see your culture represented? How does race impact your education? How does the race of your educators impact your education? And really not saying, oh, maybe race is not an issue for you personally, and moving away from that. And I think specifically around the youth group, we were kind of conscious about the fact that schools are very mixed environments. Teachers are predominantly not anti-racist teachers who have been educated in that area and don't bring that expertise into the classroom, because that's a thing that Sharon has said, and we've all said we want to see, and this is a thing that we are moving towards, but isn't ready yet. So what was really unique about the youth group was that it is facilitated by anti-racist youth workers, youth workers who have lived experience in racism. And so we can kind of facilitate that environment where it is automatically so much safer to engage conversations about race and racism and how we experience the world. And that was a particular important thing to kind of consider throughout this consultation, throughout the different phases, because I guess the question is, how do we ensure that these conversations are safe when we meet a national group of young people who have not met each other before, who have not met us before, we're meeting on Zoom? How do we ensure that they're not just triggered by the conversation, that it becomes unsafe, and that they get re-traumatized from that experience? And so there's a lot of difficult negotiations that we've had to have with ourselves, and kind of questions of, okay, so maybe we do a breakout room, and what is there a way of aftercare, and all these conversations that are really vital when we want to set up spaces where these conversations can be tackled. And they are kind of balanced with the fact, if we don't talk about race, and if we don't talk about racism, if we don't name it what is happening, then we also kind of re-traumatizing, because we are gaslighting people to ignoring their experiences and pretending that the violence that they're experiencing is not happening, which is also wrong to do. So there's a lot of difficult things to play around with.
Sharon, did you want to pick up on what Titi's been exploring there?
Thank you. What Titi's saying is absolutely correct. And these are all the conversations that Elaine and I had in our panic of, oh my goodness, we're not doing this right. So to have that insight was really, really useful. I think what I've learned is the project was designed through a white lens, with our white privilege as part of that. And actually, I didn't even appreciate what that was until I heard other people's experiences. And it's not, we can't in Scottish education say anymore that I'm not racist. We've got to say I'm anti-racist, and therefore we're actively taking steps to change and break this cycle of racism. It's not enough for Black and people of colour to be fighting for a cause all the time. It's just not. It's exhausting, it's tiring, it's demoralising, it has impacts on well-being, and actually we all are members of our society and our communities and our schools, and we all have a responsibility to be anti-racist together, and we cannot be worrying about white fragility anymore, and what that means for those. We need to just step up and say, this is who I am, this is my knowledge, but I want to make things better for my peers and my community. What do I need to learn to make a difference? And I think that's the real place just now that we need to be stepping into. It's not enough to say I'm not racist. We have to be proactive in doing something about it.
And I'd like to say thank you to the schools that have taken part in this, because the teachers have been those people, that we had the conversation that starts saying this will make such a difference to Scottish education. You're going to be part of a really important project, but it's not without its challenges. And you're part of that, and the school will be part of that, and those pupils will be part of that. So you have to be up for, being that person. And they have been, and not everybody's ready for that. So we thank the schools that have taken part for being able to put any worries aside and make any changes. So thank you.
We're thinking a little bit about the findings of the project, and I appreciate it's quite early to have final findings. Would one of you like to just talk a little bit about findings so far, early findings or early thoughts? And also, did you have an expectation at the start of the project about what the findings might be, or did you go in willing to see what came out of it?
Well, I think the aims of the project have changed as we've gone along. So we started with, let's improve Scottish education for everybody. But actually, we've got down more to the detail of how that can be, which is amazing and means that we can make those changes, that those can take place. So I guess we've been open and flexible, and we thank GTCS and Sharon for everyone for being flexible, and grateful to the children and young people and schools that have taken part who have shaped this project. Because I guess my expectations, through my own white lens at the start, were a certain way, and then reading all the literature and then working with Intercultural Youth Scotland and working with the children and young people and the schools have completely changed the detail of this project. So, I'm not surprised by some of the things we're learning. I'm not surprised by some of the things the children and teachers are sharing, but in other ways, I'm seeing things very differently. So I'm very grateful for that. And I think what we find through this project will be really insightful and make a change. But yes, it's changed from the start.
Sharon?
I think for me, one of my hopes for the project as well is that we have a better representation of Black and people of colour as teachers. At the moment, 4% of the population are Black and people of colour, and only 1% of our teachers are Black and people of colour. So our young people are not being taught by people that look like them. And then they're not aspiring to become teachers themselves. And then the more Black and people of colour teachers that we have, the more that we will start to break the cycle of racism as well. And there will be people with lived experiences who can collectively speak and share and be that safe place for our young people, our children and young people in schools. And I hope that the conversations that we're having now, I hope that the learning that the teachers have gone through, I noticed it when we were doing our training sessions. I could see that kind of look, because I've been there and done that myself, that, oh my goodness, I have a lot to learn kind of look on their faces. This process for me, and it will be the same for everybody else, is that you are questioning your beliefs and your values that you've had throughout your whole life, because these are things that have been imprinted on you as you have grown and developed, and these have been your contextual circumstances. So to hear such traumatic experiences that people have experienced round about you that you've not even noticed, is you question yourself as a person. So there's a big messy process to go through, and actually that needs to be supported, but it needs to happen. It must happen, and our young people then will feel they will be better served and they will be better nurtured, and society will generally be a better place if we can actually make a difference through this project. So Elaine's right, there have been big changes and different expectations, but there are so many positive outcomes that can come from this project going forward.
Titi, you were going to pick up on what Elaine and Sharon had said.
Yes, thank you. I think particularly around the issue around the underrepresentation of Black and POC people as teachers and in the teaching profession is really also a reflection of our education system not being anti-racist and being a very traumatizing space, and being an often racist space. And if we can't, so that means for me that we need to work on the school environment and ensure that in that path of becoming a teacher and staying a teacher and being a teacher, that space is a safe space to be for a person of color. And that will actually ensure that people can take up the profession and serve the young people in the way that we want them to serve. And obviously representation is a huge thing. So that will be something that, and I think that's a small thing that we've already noticed from the consultations, that young people think it would be a fun experience to be taught by someone of their own cultural background, or that would be an additional, help or bonus or a good thing if they saw themselves reflected back. I also think there's considerations probably around reporting racism and incidences of racism, and kind of how that structure functions and how these cases are taken up or not taken up, or constructively dealt with or not so constructively dealt with, that I kind of see themes already. And I'm generally really, really curious what we kind of find out about curriculum and how that should be changed, or how that can consider race in a more appropriate way as well.
I think for me, from the first phase, was one of the most powerful moments for me was when the young people taking part in phase one shared how they felt when they'd seen something from their point of view was positive happening in their school. So something that was more inclusive of a diverse culture. And they talked about, well, on that day we had this assembly and this happened. And those are small things and they're not good enough. They're tokenistic in many ways. However, those young people suddenly felt included and represented and saw other people that looked like them and with their background, and what an impact that had. And so, we have to look at the curriculum, we have to look at school ethos, we have to look at representation within all aspects of school, because that really, the words that they shared was, oh, suddenly I was engaged, suddenly I saw myself, suddenly I understood, suddenly my questions were asked. So for me, that was the most powerful part of phase one of this project. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the suggestions from young people and from the schools, and what they have seen that has worked and what they would like to see change moving forward.
And that was going to be what I asked next, I suppose, as we round up our discussion, is what are your future aspirations and future aims, both in terms of this project, but also, I suppose, in a wider sense as they relate to your wider work? What will you take away from this experience and from the learning so far that will support your work, but also the way you live in the world? Elaine?
That's a huge question, Lynn. But it's because there's huge learning from this project. So obviously we want there to be a positive impact from this project on Scottish education, and I genuinely believe there will be. I know that GTCS are committed to this. They reach the staffing across Scotland, they listen to children and young people. This will have impact. On a sort of professional note, from my point of view, work at Children in Scotland, I have learned, or I am starting to learn, about my place within that system and my place within a charity that has a seat at the table and has that privilege. And the word privilege, to me, I've learned a lot about that as well in this project. So I know that moving forward, we'll work differently at Children in Scotland, and I will see things differently in my professional life and my personal life. And it's opened my eyes to so many aspects of life as well. So I'm very grateful. I'm very honoured to have taken part in this project. It's very exciting. It's been very challenging, but very exciting to be at the forefront of those changes and, to be part of that. So I'm just very grateful.
Titi, can I come to you next for your reflections?
I think what I like to see is young people, and especially LAC and PUC young people, at the centre of decision making and framing and envisioning structures that are made for them, right? Like school is for the young people. It's for their education. So they should be at the center of it and decide how it is done and what it is like and how it can be improved and reformed. And that's really what I want to see and what I want us to continue doing. And the other thing that I wanted to say is just, I'm really grateful for every single person, and it doesn't matter your background or how much experience you have with anti-racism, or if you've come to this discussion today, I'm really grateful for a person if they are just able to listen and to just consider what they're being confronted with. And I know it often feels like a confrontation if it's like, you have to change your entire system. I have experienced racism my entire life in the way you teach whatever. So it can appear confrontational, but it is so important that you don't give up, but you actually pick up that at that wherever you are and kind of start learning and start that journey and allow yourself, okay, I'm not perfect, but I want to improve and I want to learn more and I want to do something about it. And I'm not going to center myself, but I'm going to center the society that I'm in and the young people I want to serve and make it about that. Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. It's what you've all spoken to in our conversation, is that these are challenging and difficult discussions, but they should also be able to be open and supportive discussions rather than confrontational, so people have an excuse, I suppose, to turn their back on the conversations. And that has come through so strongly in what you've all said. Sharon, I'll come to you for your reflections.
Thank you. Going forward, I think the next steps of the project will be really exciting. I hope to see the good work that's done in phase 2 build and grow wider across Scotland. And we had to readjust the project in the middle as we brought Intercultural Youth Scotland on board. But I think that there will be huge potential and it'll have a really impactful reach. What I do hope is that the voices of the young people who have spoken are really heard, and that actually those voices and those suggestions and those recommendations turn into something that's tangible and has had an impact, a positive impact on society. I think teachers will step up and they will listen, but it's one thing to all of a sudden start decolonising the curriculum and trying to have conversations round about historical aspects of society, Black people in society. But if you don't do that with an anti-racist training, you potentially can do more harm than good. So we really need to consider if we're going to take action, let's do it correctly and not half-heartedly or in a misinformed manner. And I am hugely hopeful and hugely positive that this will make a real difference going forward. It has to, absolutely has to. And can I just say on behalf of General Teaching Council, I'm really grateful to be working with both Children in Scotland and Intercultural Youth Scotland.
Thank you so much to all of you. It's been a really fascinating discussion and a really open discussion. And I hope that for everybody who listens to this, they'll take something away from it. They'll want to know more. They'll want to do anti-racist work themselves, become anti-racists, and just be part of the discussion and part of the work that lies ahead. So thank you so much to Elaine. Thank you to Titi. And thank you to Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you for listening to the Children in Scotland podcast. To find out more about our Diversity in Scottish Education project and to explore all of our projects and work, head to our website at childreninscotland.org.uk.